Islam taught us that during these times, these blessed times, we shouldn't just go with the flow. We should try to seize the opportunity. One of the things about fasting, it's a natural thing. When people fast, they tend to get a little bit irritable. Not having tea, not having food, some people not having cigarettes. It causes problems, and it's hard sometimes to maintain the same type of cheerfulness, the same type of spirit of friendliness and love and compassion, especially at home. You know how it is that after a long day of fasting, hot weather, people just feeling grumpy. So one of the things that we were taught by the Ahlul Bayt is that when we're fasting, we should make sure that we don't let our physical condition affect our behavior with others, especially our family. Look at what the Holy Prophet says. In his khutbah before Ramadan, he says that, "O people, man hasuna minkum fi hadha ash-shahri khulquhu kana lahu jawazun ala sirati thumma tazillu fihi aqdam." That person who improves his character, who improves his behavior during this month, let alone somebody who becomes grumpy and grumbles all the time, somebody who improves his character during this month, uses it to improve themselves, that person is going to have a passport to sail through Sirat al-Mustaqim on that day in which the footsteps will falter. On that day where, of course, we're told that the path is sharper than the sword, thinner than a hair. That day, the person who has good character in the month of Ramadan, who improves his character, will have a free passport to just sail through without being taken into account. So we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the strength to use this opportunity to improve ourselves, to become better people with better character. This is Allah. I want to start tonight's discussion about the Imam of our time with a story. And this story is told to us, narrated to us from a scholar named Sayyid ibn Tawus. I already mentioned his name once. But whenever you go into the books about Imam Mehdi, you see that the name of this scholar comes up again and again. Because as I mentioned, he was one of those individuals who had attained such a level of perfection, such a level of obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that the curtains of sins were lifted from his heart and he was able to see the Imam, despite the Imam being in the ghaiba. There are individuals for whom the Imam, even though he's in a ghaiba for the rest of us, he's not in a ghaiba for them. He's accessible to them. And one of these individuals was Sayyid ibn Tawus. So we can learn a lot from him. He reports in one of his books that one time in the early morning, before Fajr, he was reciting prayers in Samarra. And he had gone to the Sardab there. Those of you who have gone for ziyarat, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all tawfiq to go for ziyarat into the holy places. You've been there, you've seen this place where you go down into the basement area. He was reciting his prayers in that area, and he heard the voice of someone who he recognized to be the Imam of our time. Now it's interesting, there's a few lessons we can learn from that. One of them is that the Imam alayhi salam is reciting his prayers at that time. And those of us who are seeking to form a connection with our Imam, what better way than to be doing prayers when the Imam is doing prayers, in the early dawn before the Fajr time. Second of all, what's interesting is that Sayyid ibn Tawus knew the Imam so well that he could recognize his voice. He knew who it was who was saying these words. Now he heard the Imam's voice in dua. At this time, we're told in Hadith that this is one of the best times to recite dua. Dua is accepted in the Sahar time. The Imam alayhi salam, what is he praying for? He's saying, Allahumma inna shi'atana khuliqat min shu'a'i anwarina wa baqiyati tinatina. O Allah, indeed our Shia are created from the rays of our lights and from the same soil that we are created from. وَقَدْ فَعَلُوا ذُنُوبًا كَثِيرَةً اتِّكَالًا عَلَى حُبِّنَا وَوِلَايَتِنَا. And they have committed a number of sins, a great number of sins, depending on our love and depending on our wilayah over them. So what does he say now? He says that these sins are between, if these sins, فَإِنْ كَانَتْ ذُنُوبُهُمْ بَيْنَكَ وَبَيْنَهُمْ, if these sins are sins that they committed against you, O Allah, then forgive them for that. فَاصْفَعْ عَنْهُمْ. Because we are pleased with them. فَقَدْ رَضِينَا. And if it's the case that the sins are between each other, they violated the rights of each other, then the Imam ﷺ is praying that Allah causes that issue to be rectified, for there to be peace and for those rights to be restored. Now when we hear this report from a credible authority, it gives us a clue as to a characteristic of the Imam. The Imam ﷺ is somebody who cares for the Shias, who cares for the leaders. Yesterday we learned another characteristic of the Imam. We learned that first of all, the Imam is somebody that the Quran describes as being somebody who has reached a very high level, a level beyond the level of just nubuwah or risala, or in the case of Nabi Ibrahim, a special friend of Allah. The Quran describes him as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying, إِنِّي جَاعِلُكَ لِلنَّاسِ إِمَامًا. That after all these things, Nabi Ibrahim is raised to the station of the Imam. And Nabi Ibrahim, a select few of the prophets, Nabi Ibrahim and his descendants like Nabi Isa, Nabi Musa, and of course his sons Ismail, Ishaq, the descendants, of course our prophet as well, they had reached the status of Imam. We learned yesterday that the Imam enjoys that status, and he is the one who guides us from darkness into light. Now today we're learning about another characteristic of the Imam. This report gives us one clue as to this characteristic. I want to quote another report which gives us more information about this dimension of the Imam. As I mentioned yesterday, we can't just go to Google or look on Wikipedia and get a report of what the Imam is doing right now and what he's like right now. We can't go and see, okay, this is a picture of the Imam, this is his bio information, these are the acts that he's done in recent times. We don't know. It's inaccessible to us. But we have other ways of getting to know the Imam. One time, during the time of our 8th Imam, Imam Rida alayhi salam, the Shias fell into a dispute about the nature of the Imam. They were confused. Because throughout history, different definitions have been given for what an Imam is. Some have said that an Imam is just a political leader. Right? Whoever has the reins of control over the Muslims is the Imam of the time. Just like you can have anybody, according to some schools of jurisprudence, not the ones that we accept, they say that anybody who can recite the Quran can go and lead the prayer. Similarly, anybody who happens to seize the power at that time, he's the Imam of the time. So the Shias fell into a dispute. They went to the masjid and they were discussing amongst themselves. And the Imam ﷺ happened to be the 8th Imam. Now one of the companions who is there, by the name of Abdul Aziz ibn Muslim, he sees the Imam and he says that, why are we disputing this? Why don't we just go to the source and ask him? Let him clear it out for us. So he goes to the Imam, he explains the situation. He says that your friends and your companions are discussing what is an Imam. Can you please help us out? Imam Rida smiles. And he then goes on to say that these people who are just expressing their opinions on this issue, well, it doesn't really help. For somebody to just express their viewpoints. And in fact, they are being deceived by their own viewpoints. Just like you did, they need to come to the source and ask the question. And then he goes on to explain what is an Imam. It's very beautiful to see the definition of Imam from an Imam. And this hadith is one of those hadith which really, it's one of those golden hadith, because he talks about different dimensions. He talks about it from the Quran, talks about it from Aql, and then he goes on to explain the characteristics of the Imam. I want to focus in on one line where he describes one aspect of the Imam. He says that the Imam, who is the Imam? Al-Imamu al-Anis al-Rafiq, wal-Walid al-Shafiq, wal-Akh al-Shaqiq, wal-Umm al-Barrahu bil-Walad al-Saghir, wa-Mafsa'u al-Ibadi fi-Dahiyat al-Na'adi. What does he say? He says the Imam is that friend who is a very good companion for you. that very close friend who is compassionate. The Imam is that father who doesn't want anything but good for his child. The Imam is that brother who is shaqiq. You see, we have some brothers who are brothers only through the mother's side, or they're brothers only through the father's side, or they're brothers because when they were young babies, they happened to feed from the same wet nurse, for example. But there's that brother who is shaqiq, who both from the father's side and the mother's side is a brother. So the Imam is that. The Imam is the brother who is shaqiq from both sides. The Imam is the mother that is very compassionate over her child. And the Imam is that refuge for the servants when they're afflicted with terrible afflictions. This is the refuge which they can turn to.
Wow.
So my brothers and sisters, you see that the Imam is somebody who has great compassion, great love for his fellow believers. The Imam is somebody who loves his believers. The Imam is somebody who has compassion for human beings, compassion for humanity. And this isn't something that should strike us as unfamiliar, but it's something that we need to pay attention to. Because if we want to understand the Imam, we have to understand how is it that he operates with people. As we said, one of the ways that he's going to spread his message of justice is going to be through his character. As we talked about before, we're told in numerous hadith that the Imam ﷺ has the same moral characteristics of our Holy Prophet. And the Quran describes the moral characteristics of the Prophet in a very beautiful way. One of the very extremely powerful verses of the Quran. If you want to know our Holy Prophet and you want to know the Ahlul Bayt, and you want to know the Imam of the time, you can go to this verse. It's at the end of Surah At-Tawbah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is describing the Prophet and his characteristics. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that indeed a prophet, a messenger has come to you. Azizun alayhi ma anittum, harisun alaykum bil mu'minina ra'ufur rahim. Indeed, a messenger has come to you from among you. Now, what are his characteristics that Allah is describing in the Quran? Azizun alayhi ma anittum. When something troubles you, the Prophet is very distressed on your account. The Prophet is aware of what's going on with us. The Prophet is aware of the situation of the Muslims, of humanity as a whole. And when they are troubled, the Prophet is troubled as well. Harisun alaykum. Somebody who's haris with respect to something is somebody who holds this thing very dear to him. It's something that is very near and dear. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying He's saying that the Muslims are very dear to the Prophet. And then Allah goes on to describe that with the believers, bil-mu'minina ra'ufun rahim. The Prophet is very compassionate and very merciful. Those of you who are familiar with the Quran, you'll notice that these two adjectives being used for the Prophet, ra'uf and rahim, they're used for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So look at the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is praising the Prophet. Those same two adjectives that He uses for Himself, He's using for the Prophet. Just the way Allah is the Ra'uf and Rahim. If you want to see the Ra'afa and the Rahmah of Allah, look at the Prophet. And then this same Prophet is the one who says that my descendant, who will have the same name as me, will have the same characteristics as me. So we can know that the Mehdi, Imam Mehdi, will be very compassionate and very merciful. Please just go. Brothers and sisters, if we go and look at these stories and reports about the compassion of our Imams, of our Prophet, of Sayyidah Fatima, they're innumerous. And there's so many things to say, and they're very important. It's very important that we study these. We understand who the Ahlul Bayt are. But that is one way of coming to know who they are. It's one way of coming to understand that characteristic of them. From a distance, we look at the report and we appreciate it. We say that, okay, we smile. We feel good when we see that such individuals care about us so much. But the question I'd like to pose now is this the only way of coming to know that characteristic? If it's the case that they possess that attribute, is the only way for us to know about it is for us to just read it and to read stories about them and read reports about them? Or is there another way which we can come to know this characteristic? And in order for me to answer this question, I want to go back to a question that I asked you a couple of days ago. I said that, are there any verses in the Quran which tell us to form a connection with the Ahlul Bayt, with the awliya of Allah, with those individuals who are ma'asum, with those individuals whom the Quran has praised and Allah has praised as being above and beyond the rest? Was anybody able to find a verse like that? Let me ask the brothers and sisters. Inshallah, we were looking through the Quran, searching for this verse. Anybody? Sorry? Surah Ma'idah, which verse? Do you remember the verse? Inshallah, next time you can bring it. Okay, inshallah, you bring it next time. So inshallah, that's homework for next time, inshallah. You can look for it. There's a number of verses which talk about developing a relationship with people like the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. I want to mention one of them right now, which will answer the question I posed. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and you've heard this verse before, it's in Surah Tawbah again. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu, ittaqullaha wa kunu ma'as sadiqeen. O you who believe, if, I'm paraphrasing, I'm explaining the flow of the verse here. A sign of your belief is what? Belief isn't just a matter of professing with the tongue. A sign of your belief is to develop taqwa of Allah, ittaqullah. Now, how do you form taqwa of Allah? How do you become aware of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? The way to do so is by being with the sadiqeen. Kunu ma'as sadiqeen. Be with the sadiqeen. Now, who are the sadiqeen? The sadiqeen, somebody who is sadiq is somebody who is truthful. But not just truthful in the Arabic language, not just truthful in what they say. It's somebody whose internal state fully matches their external state. There's not even a bit of hypocrisy in what they do. And this doesn't just go with what they say. Their actions are filled with truth. Their characteristics are filled with truth as well too. Every intention, every desire that they have, it's based on truth. Their whole being revolves around truth. These are the people who are the Sadiqeen. And when we look at the definition of Sadiqeen and we look at the riwayat that are attached to this verse, we see that the Sadiqeen are none other than the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. He says, notice here that Allah isn't just saying appreciate the good characteristics of the Sadiqeen. He doesn't just say go and study their good merits. He says be with them. Be with them. Meaning that it's not just enough for us to appreciate at a distance. We should try to go and emulate what they have as well. Let me give you an example from the Quran. This is the month of the Quran. We're speaking from the basis of the Quran. At one point in his life, it seems that this is towards the end of his life, Nabi Ibrahim a.s. has a question that comes to his mind. What is this question that he has? He says, Rabbi, arini kayfa tuhyil mawta. Oh Allah, I want to know how is it that you bring the dead to life. This is a characteristic of Allah, that Allah brings the dead to life. After they're dead, Allah will resurrect them. Now, Allah SWT asks him, Awalam tu'min, oh Ibrahim, isn't it the case that you have conviction? Don't you know that I am the one? Nabi Ibrahim says, no, it's not the matter of doubt. But وَلَكِنْ يَطْمَئِنَّ قَلْبِي. I want to have a different type of conviction. I want to know this in my heart. I don't want to just see this from a distance, oh Allah. I want to see it in my heart. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to give him a view from a distance about how he now brings things that are dead to life. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to give him the power to bring dead things to life. So what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? He says, فَخُذْ أَرْبَعَةً مِنَ الطَّيْرِ. Take 4 birds. And then in tradition we're told that he is told to cut the birds into pieces, to scatter the pieces into 4 different mounds, into 4 different corners. And then فَصُرْهُنَّ إِلَيْكَ. Make them come to you. Make them, you Ibrahim, you make them come to you. Not that you can see from a distance how I can bring these dead birds to life. No, you make them come to you. And then ثُمَّ جَعَلَ عَلَىٰ كُلِّ جَبَلٍ مِنْهُنَّ جُزْءًا ثُمَّ ادْعُهُنَّ يَأْتِينَكَ سَعْيًا وَاعْلَمْ أَنَّ اللَّهَ عَزِيزٌ حَكِيمٌ. You'll see that they come to you. So Nabi Ibrahim ﷺ is now vested with that attribute of Allah, with that power of Allah to bring the dead to life. And he does. You see, our brothers and sisters, Nabi Ibrahim witnesses this characteristic of Allah within himself. Now, let's go back to the discussion. We said that from the reports that we have, we understand that the Imam ﷺ is extremely compassionate. Extremely compassionate. One way we can know this is from a distance, but another way, which is a superior way, is that we can ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We say, oh Allah, you are the one who reflect your compassion and mercy in the Imam of the time. So let us experience that compassion and mercy within ourselves. And by doing so, we can come to know the Imam of our time. Because when we see it up front and close within us, that's when we can start to know what the Imam is like. You see, my brothers and sisters, coming to know the Imam, getting closer to the Imam, the best way of doing so is to become like the Imam. To take the perfection of the Imam, and to the extent that we can, of course we're not going to get to that level, to the extent that we can, to imbibe and to inculcate those characteristics within ourselves. Please say salawat. So this takes us to our first way of getting closer to the Imam, which is the topic of our series here. The first way is to become people who are compassionate, to become people who care. Not to be people who are apathetic, who are selfish, who live in their own boxes, and don't care about what's really going on around us. I'm not talking about somebody who once in a while pulls out his checkbook, writes a check, and then goes along with his life. I'm talking about people whose hearts actually are filled with compassion, whose hearts bleed when they see the pain being suffered by other people, who honestly and genuinely are there to help each other out. Now, how do we do that? How can we become compassionate people? What is it that the Ahlul Bayt wanted to see from us? How do we fight apathy and that feeling of selfishness that we see in the society around us? You can think about those questions, inshallah. Tomorrow we'll discuss. But for today, I want to go back to those reports. As I mentioned, there's a lot of reports that we have that talk about the compassion of the Ahlul Bayt. Since we have just a couple of minutes left, let me give you one more report. We have to study these, brothers and sisters. We can't neglect these stories. This is the heritage that our scholars throughout history have, and the companions of the Ahlul Bayt have put in so many efforts to make sure that these stories and these reports were preserved when they get to us. We have to go through them. We have to understand them. This story comes to us from somebody named Rumayla. Rumayla was a companion of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib. This comes to us from a time where the Imam is the Khalifa in Kufa. Rumayla tells us that one time I became very sick, and I wasn't able to go to the masjid to pray behind the Imam. And Friday came along, and even though I wasn't feeling so good, I said that what better way of getting my health restored and feeling energetic than to go and pray behind the Imam of our time. Reminds us of the importance of going to the masjid and going for Friday prayers. So he says that I took a wudu, got some energy, and then I went to the mosque, and I started listening to the khutbah of the Imam for Jummah prayers. But during the course of the khutbah, my sickness came back to me, and I started feeling weak again. And so when the Imam came down from the minbar, I was unable to go behind him and say salam to him. Only later on, after he had gone out of the masjid, I came upon him, I followed him. And after he sees me, he greets me. And he asked me where I was, and please say salawat. The Imam tells him that, oh Rumayla, I noticed that your condition was a little bit off. And so Rumayla goes and explains, that I was sick and I wasn't able to attend the masjid for a few days. So the Imam then tells him something very beautiful, and this is a message for us, brothers and sisters. He says, Ya Rumayla, O Rumila, لَيْسَ مِنْ مُؤْمِنٍ يَمْرَضُ إِلَّا مَرَضْنَا بِمَرَضِهِ. There is no believer, but that when he or she gets sick, we get sick because of his sickness. And there is no believer such that he or she becomes sad, but that we become sad on account of his or her sadness. And there's no believer except that when they make dua, we are the ones who say Ameen for the dua. Ameen, by the way, means, oh Allah, accept this dua. And even when they end, when they finish making their dua, they become silent, we continue their dua for them. We continue where they left off. So then, Rumayla has something in his mind here. After hearing this beautiful statement from the Imam, this compassion of the Imam, he has one thing to ask the Imam. He says, "Oh Imam, O Mir Mu'mineen, is this something that is limited to the people who live in this palace, who are in this vicinity? That you're aware of what's going on with them? Or is it something that extends beyond this geographical boundary as well too?" So the Imam ﷺ answers him. He says that whoever is in any part of the earth, nobody who is a believer is hidden from us, whether he be in the east of the earth or in the west of the earth. This same thing applies to them. So Imam ﷺ is speaking to a follower, a Shia of this time, a believer at this time. The same thing applies to the Imam of our time. If we are sad, if we are unhappy, the Imam ﷺ is unhappy with us. And in fact, his unhappiness is more than our unhappiness. And if it's the case that we're doing the dua, the Imam ﷺ is doing dua with us. If this is the compassion of the Imam towards the believers, what sort of compassion should we have for them as we try to emulate the Imam and become closer to him? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us to take the example of the Imam, to follow it, and to become closer to him and to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is all. Allah.